Recording in progress. So I did want to say we're so happy that the both of you are here, and so grateful that Tim is rallying for this in your state of not being too well. And we're missing Alison Gibbons, and so we're really sorry she couldn't be present. But I do want to read her biography as well as the two of yours to get us started. Alison is a reader in contemporary stylistics at Sheffield Hallam University in the UK. She's the author of Multimodality, Cognition and Experimental Literature, Routledge 2012, and co-editor of Mark Z. Danielski, Manchester University Press, 2011, the Routledge Companion to Experimental Literature, 2012, and the aforementioned volume, and Pronouns in Literature, Positions and Perspectives in Language, Palgrave Macmillan, 2018. She's also published widely in international peer-reviewed journals, including Ariel, Contemporary Literature, Metaphor in the Social World, Narrative, and Textual Practice. Her research consistently takes a stylistic approach to innovative contemporary narratives, including empirical reception research, and is currently focused on metamodernism and autofiction. And next, so Robin van den Akker is senior lecturer in the humanities and director of the Erasmus Center for Liberal Arts and Sciences at Erasmus University, Rotterdam. He also is academic board member of the Rotterdam Arts and Sciences Lab and coordinator of the MA Societal Transitions at the Erasmus School of Philosophy. As acting program coordinator and head of department, he has been foundational in establishing the Humanities Department at Erasmus University College, Rotterdam. Robin has written extensively on the digitization of everyday life and contemporary aesthetics and culture, and his work has been translated in numerous languages, including Mandarin, Russian, German, and Spanish. Robin was founding editor of the research platform Notes on Metamodernism, which mapped and analyzed changes in aesthetics and culture that are symptomatic of the postmodern condition. He is editor of the edited collection, the aforementioned collection, which we'll be talking about today.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. And also to Greg and to Anthony for having us. I think we should keep repeating that. It's wonderful that you put this together, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Tim Vermeulen is professor of media, culture, and society at the University of Oslo, Norway. He is founding editor of the now archived webzine Notes on Metamodernism and regular contributor to Frieze and Art Forum. Vermeulen publishes across the disciplines of critical and cultural theory, aesthetics, and screen studies. He's currently finalizing a manuscript titled Gestures of Time, Screen Performance as Temporal Form, to be out with SUNY Press, 2023. A collection on the films of Richard Linklater, edited with Kim Wilkins, is published with EUP later this year. So let us get started. Alison edited and wrote the opening essay for the middle section of your volume on affect. Tim, you edited and wrote the opening essay for the section on depth. And Robin edited and wrote the opening essay for the section on historicity. And the two of you here wrote the introduction essay to the entire book. And I wonder if some people might, who are less familiar with the terrain, might like to hear just a little about how your partnership came to be. I know you've been working for some time together. Your first essay coming out in 2009, possibly 10.
Our partnership, Tim, can you kick off?
I
gladly do.
I should also first say thanks, Linda and Craig, for putting this together. It would have been really, really nice to finally meet you in person. I'm really sorry to miss that. And also thanks to Anthony and Usha and Dennis for putting together this amazing AHRC network, which is, I think, the sort of through line for all of these wonderful events that we've had the couple of past years. So really thanks, and also thanks to everyone who's there. There were some people who I would have loved to meet up with, So I'm super sad not to do that in person, but I'm sure there'll be other opportunities. Yeah, the partnership. I mean, I don't know. Robin and I have known each other for a very, very long time. We did our bachelor, our undergrads together in Rotterdam in cultural history, and so we've known each other for ages. And I think there we took courses in philosophy with, amongst others, Jos de Mul, whose book Romantic Desire was an enormous, really, I would say, an enormous influence on us. As well, I guess, as a course that we both took at the University of Essex as exchange students with Fiona Hughes on Immanuel Kant and Kantian notions of history. And I think those two courses, in a way, are still so much present in all of what we've done together since. And so we started working on this when we were both doing our PhDs on completely unrelated topics. We started working together with Niels van Poeken, another colleague who is now working at UvA in Amsterdam, to try and figure out what was happening in some of the art shows that we were seeing, some of the books that we were reading, that all of them no longer to us seem to really be explicable or make sense within those frameworks that we had been taught at university. And so that's how we started. And in terms of that was 2006, I think. We had a conference 2007 on New Romanticism that I organized at the University of Reading. So that's how Robin and I know each other. Alison, we met at a conference in Uppsala, where Danuta Fjellestad invited us at a really, really wonderful conference on futures of the present, I want to say it was called. There was also a really nice special issue that Danuta did with all of us. And there were amazing people, but Alison was also there. And she gave an absolutely brilliant paper. We really got along. And we decided to do something together because Robin and I both love books, but are very limited in knowledge about sort of literature and literary theory when it comes to an academic point of view. Plus, Alison seemed like a proper academic. So it seemed like a really, really good thing to have someone working with us who actually, who, for example, pushed this book. Without Alison, this book would have never happened. I think it's fair to say. Or Robin, I think.
Highly fair.
Yeah. So yeah, and also I think Alison she texted earlier, she is with us in spirit today. So yeah. But so that's where we met Alison. And so I think the whole project with the three of us working together really came about as a kind of a friendship / collegial or academic interest that overlapped. And the book was done. We invited people that we admired and people that we thought would contribute something very important to the book. Not necessarily people who had written on metamodernism before, but people whose work we felt sort of fitted with what we imagined metamodernism to be. They all wrote it. We spent a weekend together in Rotterdam, in Robin's house. We spent a weekend together in Sheffield, where Alison was living. And then the book was there. Is that fair, Robin?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe it's also good to mention that many of the authors in the book originally published on the website that was mentioned as well in the biography were read out by Linda. So the website Notes on Metamodernism, we were never very good with titles. That's the same title as the essay we published in 2009 or so. So the book was also there to reflect that there was this generation of younger theorists, younger students of culture, younger curators, younger artists themselves, and that rallied around that particular flag of that website. And so in the spirit of that website, namely, we have an intuition, and that is that the culture that we see around us can no longer be described in terms of postmodern vernacular, and this is the flag. Please help us figure it out, help mapping us, what's going on in culture, compare it to what happened in the 70s, 80s, and the 90s, and please help us tease out the commonalities and differences. So that was the research project of that website. Very collaborative project in that sense. There were about 30 people writing on that particular platform. Also very much exploratory project. We have never sort of tried to pigeonhole artists or box in or box out certain developments, but really mapping it and trying to situate it historically and finding a language to these developments. So it was collaborative and exploratory, and in that spirit, we also chose to write or edit an edited collection because we could reflect the spirit of collaboration, the spirit of exploration, and to do that with people that were already writing with and for us via that website. So that was the thinking behind an edited collection, and not, for instance, a monograph in which you would sort of press home your own particular perspective on the debate at hand, but really enable sort of a platform for different voices to reflect on the current moment. So that's why it's also an edited collection and not a monograph.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to try to share screen. I have a few quotes from your. Let me get myself sorted here. A few quotes from your book. There we go. Okay, that's where we want to be.
Mm-hmm.
Oops, somehow I need some permissions. Oh, sorry, that was the wrong thing. There we go. Okay. So yes, that's what we're looking at now. Yeah, I have always appreciated that. It seemed to me that you all came to this discussion about what this postmodern language would be like after, as you quoted Frederick Jameson in your intro essay, that, as you say, Robin, the languages that had been used didn't speak adequately to the historical moment. Now, of course, Jameson was talking about postmodernism there, but with the same kind of basic idea, to give some new language to explain and explore what's in front of us now being since around 2000. And you jump in together saying, let's theorize this at a time when others have also come to a similar sense that we need some new language, new distinctions. And they sometimes led to different conclusions, as we've seen at times in the debates between, or maybe not debates per se, but people floating the ideas of hypermodernism, altermodernism, performatism, and even different iterations of metamodernism, what the most important central point was. So my first set of questions, I wonder if you feel that postmodernism, from your vantage point, has advanced. Has it been sufficiently mapped? Maybe it'd be more fair to ask after the symposium here, but does it seem to you that we, the larger body of metamodernism researchers, have helped to create a shared language to map it, or perhaps we've productively muddied the waters? How do the narratives that your volume explores look any different to you, perhaps, than 5 or 7 years ago?
Well, they in a sense, they should look different, because you always write from a particular subject position, a certain time and space. I think it's very important to indeed also contextualize and historicize the text that you're producing, and to not presuppose that there are some kind of eternal truths in there. What I do think, though, is that many of the intuitions that we originally formulated, let's say around 2008, 9, 10, and some of the more thorough conceptualizations that we attempted to start basically in the volume, they still ring very much true in a sort of historically contextualized sense. So in that sense, I think much of the work has aged quite well and should be constantly updated, revised, reconceptualized, revisited, etc. But I believe that there are still very there are quite some good starting points to conceptualize the here and now and historicize the present. And yeah, so our basic sort of idea that the 2000s as a period, you could see the emergence of a structure of feeling that we have come to call metamodern, and that structure of feeling in that period also, yeah, mobilized a certain cultural sensibility and a set of cultural practices. I think that still holds true, and the set of cultural practices that we have seen emerging, yeah, they all sort of react to this period, to this structural feeling, and they actually have come into their own, I would say, as indeed something that is very recognizably different than the set of practices of the postmodern moment, and a set of practices that speaks to the present crisis-ridden moment. So, in that sense, I think yes, of course, all kinds of interpretations are possible, and thank God. But the particular intuitions and conceptualizations that we proposed are very much with us still today.
Yeah, but I do think it's important. That's also it's a good question, because it's important also to stress that sort of opening essay and a lot of what we try to do on the blog with all of the other collaborators, all of the other people that we met along the way, was exploratory and was intuitive, was based on a kind of intuition. The 2010 article, we wrote it, I think, in 2007 after that conference. To 8 maybe. I mean, it is obvious that that's written in a kind of non-academic way. It's very much premised on an intuition that we shared, and that we tried to sort of to understand. We tried to sort of get our heads around something that we felt more than that we knew. And so that's very broad, right? There's some quite sweeping statements in that essay that I'm also thinking some of them I feel are still very valid, but some of them sure could be nuanced or might have to be nuanced. And so a lot of the work that I've admired since, both from the people writing in the book, but also the work you've been doing. I just finished Anthony's new book, which is so amazing. I think it's just fleshing it out, but also really turning it into directions that, of course, we didn't see maybe in 2010, or we didn't see in 2015 when we did the edited collection. So I do think the intuitions and sort of the broad structures of what I would call metamodernism, they seem entirely relevant today. But a lot of the specifics and nuances and what actually is happening and what we might do with it, that of course is something we really need to flesh out constantly, and also complicated, right? I mean, we studied philosophy, and I think part of the joy of reading philosophers, especially whether it's Immanuel Kant or Nietzsche or Deleuze or Agamben, is that it isn't so easy, right? Stuff isn't, people contradict themselves, or there is bits and pieces that don't work together. The world isn't a puzzle that fits, right? And so I also think it's nice to see that there are some muddy waters there, and that we'll encounter some problems and some inconsistencies there. For me, that seems one of the great values of research in past years. I keep coming back to Sarah Upstone, that this article, I don't know, I keep finding it better and better the more I go back to it, in the way that it really untangles some issues that we haven't, I don't think anyone has addressed and need to be addressed, for example, around issues of race and globalization and stuff like that. So yes, that's my answer.
Okay, great. Well, since you mentioned structure of feeling, sorry, this is a bit clunky to go back and forth, but that is the way we have available to us here. Set of quotes here. Since you mentioned structure of feeling, Robin, I just wanted to put that up for folks who, again, may be new to this, some of these phrases that a lot of us have been using quite a lot, but it's a really powerful phrase, I think, and I know it was powerful for me to come across it, because I think similarly for you, it was this moment of illumination, and a light bulb went off, that we'd been looking at changes and trying to wrap our heads around what is this thing that is signaling a change, and the thing that it is a structure of feeling. And then we could build from there, that useful scaffold from Raymond Williams, to look at the cultural forms that are peculiar to our own, our fields. So just running across this overarching structure was a feeling of like relief, and a lot of people that we've run into also expressed thanks that somebody named this thing and we could build from there. But I also wonder, if you've had pushback on the project of identifying a structure of feeling. And what I mean by that is to say, the danger, I think, is the universalizing sense in this, especially in this current day where, identitarianism is such a strong current. If we say that there's a structure of feeling that is common, that can be problematic, that can be very fraught. So I'd like to, we're not trying to maybe answer the question of whether there is a common experience, but to hear how you've dealt with that, if there has been any pushback.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. It's indeed a crucial question, and I think sort of the biggest benefit of using the term structure of feeling when you periodize is that it, per definition, allows for this enormous variety of particular responses to it. So it is not intended to be a homogeneous, totalizing conceptualization of the now, of the present. It is intended to make sure that you can take into account a very wide variety of responses to conditions, to a structure of feeling that could become dominant within these conditions, and then try to tease out across the variety of all these different reactions and responses some commonalities and differences at the same time. So when you talk about a dominant structure of feeling, that in itself already allows for this wide variety of cultural practices. On the other hand, the term itself, dominance, is also intended to convey that at the very same moment, same historical moment, there are various structural feelings also floating around, and these structural feelings can be residual, as Frederick Jameson calls it. Jameson, of course, is the Raymond Williams, sorry. Williams is the one who used the term structural feeling, maybe not for the first time, but sort of theorized it. So there are also residual structures of feeling. So we still see pockets of modernist or romanticist or humanist or whatnot structures of feeling. And there are also emerging structural feelings. So structures of feeling that pinpoint a future that is not yet there. So both in sort of this sense of a dominant structure of feeling that allows for difference, but also the very usage of the term structure of feeling allows for multiple structures of feeling. What we try to do is basically reflect on what the dominant structure of feeling could be within our particular conditions and in this particular moment. So yes, that is a critique, but it's a critique that is not generated from within the actual conceptualization of this term by Williams.
Mm-hmm.
No, but that said, I do want to push back a bit because, I mean, Williams, of course, he develops, he devotes a chapter to the structure of feeling in Marxism and literature. But he also writes about in relationship to the Welsh novel, and before that he uses the term in his writing on theater and drama with Michael Oram in the 50s, right? So he uses it again and again and again. So it comes back. He never really develops it fully. He seems to give the term new meanings every now and then, as thinkers tend to do. So he sort of reuses it and rejigs it to fit, I guess, the new developments he's trying to map out. But in terms of, I think, sort of this universalism, I agree entirely with Robin. At the same time, I do think it's important to say that the stuff that we looked at initially So the kinds of films that we discussed, right? I think we mentioned Wes Anderson and maybe, I don't know, the change from from Todd Solondz to Wes Anderson, from smart cinema to what James McDowell calls quirky, or changes in contemporary art, right? Or changes in particular kind of novels. So let's say the move from Welbeck or Jelinek to Zadie Smith or, now Ben Lerner. All of those examples, of course, are very much related to what I guess we could call, first of all, sort of bourgeois or upper middle class tastes and taste cultures, to cultures that have their center in Europe or in America, right? So they are very much localized. I don't think that is necessarily to say, as the translations have proven, and also articles that appeared since, sort of mapping similar structures of feelings across the board in reality television, or in the case of Gry Rustad and Kai Schwind, who have mapped it in sort of network sitcoms. It is not to say that it doesn't apply elsewhere, but initially for us, we weren't sure. And also, so we never wanted to make the claim that it applied beyond the kind of cultural domains that we were mapping. And we felt that those were central domains that took a very important spot, especially sort of in cultural theory, right? I mean, in film studies, we write a lot about the move from smart to something else. In art, in visual art, people talk about the demise of the YBAs and the emergence of new romantics and then other stuff. But it was very much located in those distinct taste cultures. But again, it's not to say it doesn't apply elsewhere. I think it's been shown over the last 5-6 years that it definitely does apply elsewhere. And this was part of what the book aimed to do. But it's just not a claim, I think, that we were initially ready or would feel comfortable to make. So yeah, I wanted to add that because I do think it's important also for most of us, right? We tend to write about particular types of culture and less about others. And yeah.
Yeah, I think it can be taken as one manner of looking at a structure feeling motif if it's a more totalizing one, which I know you're trying to avoid, but it sort of depends on an ontological position of universalism or contextualism. And if you take a contextualist position, that almost sort of kicks the legs out from under the concept that there is something that unites us all in a non-contextual sense. So I think it really needs to be problematized and continually looked at. And I'm not so sure if I can imagine a structure of feeling that both performs, the conceptual work of presencing something that's really open to everyone at all times through in a given periodization or time period. And this is, of course, one of the criticisms of periodization that you hear sometimes. But it both performs that and then also speaks to with such specificity. But it's a continued debate on that.
Yeah,
but I think
yes, I mean, I'm really there with you, and I think it's important, right? But at the same time, there are particular, let's say, material developments that affect us all, right? The price of a bread, or now the inflation of all kinds of groceries here in Norway, of energy prices everywhere. We can also think about the COVID pandemic, right? The material, they affect us all, of course, to completely differing degrees, but they are a kind of a structure that is there for everyone. But the ways, of course, in which they intersect or affect us are completely different depending on, class or geography and so on and so forth. But I would say that there are those defining structures that are different now from how they might have been, 20 years ago, the period of the end of history. Right, the stuff that allowed, for instance, Fukuyama to make those bold claims about the end of history, or before that, right, the exhaustion of ideologies in Daniel Bell, or and so on and so forth. We can go back. I think there's always those distinct felt conditions, those felt experiences that do allow us to make particular observations about a moment in time or about a space somewhere.
Yeah, that's why we also always use sort of this quasi-tortured formulations. For instance, here the formulation would be the 2000s are the period in which the conditions emerged under which the metamodern structure feeling could become a dominant. And there you see all the tortured contextualizations, temporal step backs. And that is what we try to express with these tortured phrases that are not slick, but try to grapple with this.
Well, and the funny part, I think, is that I feel, and a lot of people feel, I think that metamodernism helps us step out from under this binary. That's the whole thing that it offers, is an ability to not, we sort of know by, Monica mentioned this earlier in her paper, I believe, that our human experience tells us that we're not divided neatly down this. It's an either or, universal or contextual, reason or romanticism. And it's that instinct that we know that the language that you all have helped to, to put forward about what kicks us out of that binary is exactly where we can go with these tools, blunt though they may be. Yeah. So I did have, since mention came up of well, at least I connected it to a question I had for you about quirky and the weird, because I thought maybe let's go into more of an example that some people can grab onto just a little bit more. And pull that back up. Sorry, there it is. So this is a quote also from your opening essay, just a very broad posit that something altogether weirder is taking place. And I think for many of us in our disciplines, it's definitely mine, there's a real interest in the weird. There's a real interest in understanding in my world, it's sort of relations to the peculiar, that we can enjoy narratives that include the existence of supernatural, paranormal, spiritual, zombie, monstrous, without having to solve, prove or disprove the veracity, to decide whether there's something universal there or not. It's a felt experience. Sincerity about these things is not blotted out with the ironic or deconstructive. And here we're here to talk about ironesty in a sense. But I wondered if is there still room for the weird if the narratives that we've noticed becoming more and more normative. I mean, I'm sure that many of us predicted along 8 years ago or so, when the quirky was really at its, going full guns, that at some point it would not seem very new or very different. And so different aesthetics like that came in via TV shows like The Office, Modern Family, Fleabag, that after a while, this hyper self-reflexivity and this breaking of fourth walls becomes not so weird anymore. So where do we end? Are we at a stopping point with the weird, or where does weird go from here?
I let Tim kick off because of his film scholar background. And
no, but maybe it's also good. I mean, just for context, the quote from Searle, of course, comes. The reason why we took it is that it's a review of Bourriaud's show, the Ultramodern Triennial, that he did in Tate in that year. And of course, part of the reason why we wrote that article is that to us that show seemed also so odd in a way. And the show, I think, came from 2008. So this quote was really delightful that we found it at the end of writing that piece. But it came from a review of that ultramodernism show where he said, "Look, I'm on board with postmodernism ending, but I really cannot make heads or tail of whatever it is that's supposed to be happening here instead, or as a replacement, or to follow." And so, in the same way that we really took Linda Hutchins' epilogue to heart. This was for us also confirmation. Okay, people are struggling. Let's try and figure out what it is we're talking about here. So that's just the weird there was sort of, he couldn't make sense of it. I'm not sure, I haven't thought about this that much, but what I would say, and I guess you already said it, so I'm echoing you here, is that the weird, at least on television and film, but I'm suspecting elsewhere as well, has, of course, as happens with every critical or innovative modality, has been co-opted and has become a particular kind of formula, right? Whether it's, Lady Gaga was really good, right, at sort of monetizing the monsters or that sort of sense of weirdness. And I think now we see that this kind of quirky weirdness is also just a particular formula, which is what happens, right? It happened to the smart film, which was considered a kind of a postmodern mode of filmmaking, Tot Solons, for example, or some early Sam Mendes or Alexander Payne films. The quirky, or Kim Wilkins has called it American eccentric cinema in her book. That also becomes a kind of a, something to do, right? It's a kind of formula. In the same way that, House of Cards, I really disliked the show incredibly much, but it's also because it's sort of formula of what quality television, right? This revolution that we saw on television in the early 2000s, late 90s with The Wire and with The Sopranos. And that kind of mode of filmmaking or television making, where there's different kinds of stories all going on at the same time, there's no real good or bad, and so on and so forth. All those complexities were just turned into a particular formula and then applied. So I think in that sense, the weird, as you just defined it, has become just one of those categories. But of course, at the same time, other types of weirdness and other types of liminality or new kind of experiences are constantly being constructed. And so the boundaries shift, right? I think just because a particular kind of weird and a fetishization of that weirdness, that's perhaps part of the general vernacular, which for me would be a sign that metamodernism is the dominant structure of feeling, right? The fact that seems to work to the extent that it does. Other kinds of weirdness would emerge alongside, but they will have different names and we will associate them with different affects and perhaps also have different loyalties towards them, right? I mean, if I talk to my students now, my first year students, and ask them what they watch, if they watch something on the streaming services at all still, on sort of Netflix, it will always be fantasy stuff, right? With its sort of very simplistic good and bad and big narratives, of course, but there's very sort of clear markers in all of those. And to me, a sort of childlike universe. So I don't know where I'm going with this. Maybe this is my flu talking. But so I would say, yes, the weird has been completely commodified and co-opted, but new kinds of weird, or however we call them, will emerge on the sides. They'll just have different focal points in a way. I think the key thing for quirky was really to fight against that sense of smart cinema, right? Smart cinema is there. It's really big in indie filmmaking. Everyone wants to show that the world is indifferent. Everyone wants to show the world doesn't work. Everyone wants to show that, here pedophilia, here rape, we don't really care, right? Have this sort of disaffected, is how Jeffrey Scones called it, disaffected worldview. And then so indie filmmakers like Wes Anderson, they begin to try and combine that sense of a world that is indifferent with people trying. So that's their sort of innovation. So that's also where the key lies for them, is a response to something that's been, and an attempt to rejuvenate, to completely revivify. And I'm guessing the same went for music and for art. But of course, once that's been done, then there will be another generation that has to sort of work from that particular point onwards. I mean, I remember us having this chat on your YouTube with Greg talking about Billie Eilish, who I'm guessing will be an example of something that is working very much within the same structure of feeling, but taking it to a different direction. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Can I jump in here? It makes a lot of sense, Tim. And for me, that notion of weird, that was floated around quite a bit in the mid 2000s, when we started to map and discuss all these new developments in arts and culture. And another good example here, and that's, forgive me if I'm making a bit of a detour, but then it will turn into sort of the three ways in which weird was used by then. Another good example here would be in music, indeed, where on our website there are 2 or 3 great articles by Niels van Poeck on freak folk. And when that first emerged, it was also in the cover of the Rolling Stone, I believe, or another big music magazine. It was called New Weird America. And the weird there functioned I would say in three different manners. First of all, in a sort of a empirical sociological manner. It was pinpointing a new, by then, subculture that was emerging, a subculture that rejected both their cultural context, but also sort of the subcultural predecessors they had. I think here in Seattle, it really rings home. They were actively sort of distancing themselves from the grunge, for instance, at that particular moment in time. So there was this new subculture that was called the New Weird America. A lot of romantic motives as well there, harking back to the 60s, to communes, etc. But the weird also functioned there sort of as in a conceptual philosophical manner. It was weird because it was new and didn't fit the existing bourgeois categories of what good taste, what good way of organizing yourself as an individual in a group could be. But it also had sort of this aesthetic, ethical overtone of the weird. It was also an active way of forging new ways of life, as it were, that were weird in the sense that they did not fit, indeed, mainstream ways of consumerism, for instance. And what's also interesting, what Tim said about the commoditization of that particular moment, that's also something that you actually have seen. The Freak Folk, the New Weird America, that was very good, great music, but it also got sort of mainstreamed in the end. And now we're stuck with Ed Sheeran on endless loops in every Starbucks that you visit. But that's also sort of an emblematic figure of that sensibility. So there you also see sort of this move from rather emergent sensibilities in the 2000s to something that has become entirely mainstream now, and that is the age-old singers with guitars, kind of troubadour aesthetic. So that for me is also a good way into this debate about the weird, and that what was once started the millennium rather weird and new has now been mainstreamed, and in that sense has become very much dominant. And new weird things keep appearing. So there's also, and that's maybe another sort of interesting layer here, there's also this constant need to reposition yourself away from preconceived ways of living your life, because but very much so as sort of a dominant way to position yourself vis-a-vis, I can only imagine, the materiality of our lives now that is very much crisis ridden. So you see sort of a restlessness in culture that is also very much different from sort of the dominant sensibility or way of relating to the world as it was in the postmodern years, I would say.
And then it paradoxically creates a new dominance, because, as you say, I agree that it's not just a move against the status quo. We're talking about a move away from, but a move toward subjectivity, one's felt experience, personal experience, and that becomes more normative, that we are, have permission to fly our own freak flag, and you do you, and these kind of phrases that have now become part of our culture. That's really, that's a kind of an ethos that becomes normative then. So it's interesting that way.
Yeah.
I'm just watching the clock a little bit. We're going to be breaking quite soon for lunch, and I wondered if there are any questions that people might be able to raise through the chat, I suppose.
You might have. That was a really good answer, Robin. You could have. It would have been great if you started with that answer instead of having me mumbling and stumbling my way through the.
I would just.
Quirky. That was a good answer.
Hi.
Hello, there's Usha.
Hi, Usha.
Hi, Usha.
Great to see you.
Absolutely.
Wish I was there.
Wish you were as well. So if there are any questions that can come for the live audience, I think you'll have to work through an interpreter, as it were, to get through to us. But the online audience has the advantage in this case. You can unmute yourself.
Was Greg now going to run up and down to the basement with questions? Oh yes,
Oh,
there
here
he
he
is.
comes.
What a coincidence.
I don't have a question. I have a package for Tim.
Okay, let's do the practicality after the live show.
Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful.
Or someone can type it into the chat.
Yes,
Yes.
any questions, folks? We just have a couple more minutes, but please feel welcome. There's one.
Have you noticed any trends in academic disciplines, psychology, sociology, especially with respect to their methodologies? Oh, that's very interesting. Well, can I speculate? Yeah, I can speculate in the Q&A. Well, one of the dominant trends, I would say, is to move away from disciplines. What you do see in a lot of grant application schemes or in university strategies or whatnot is a very conscious move towards what's often called transdisciplinary even. So that is a way of working together interdisciplinary to tackle complex societal concerns, but also, and that is then the secondary move, why it's called transdisciplinary, also by acknowledging societal knowledges, so situated knowledges, whether that is from societal partners that are organizations or institutions or groups that are often marginalized or were marginalized and have situated knowledges that are also of use in coming to terms with a fast changing world in which we have a lot of issues to resolve. Indigenous knowledges as well. So for me, that is the big trend in academia nowadays, that it's multiple disciplines working together to figure out how they can engage with complex societal issues, but also trying to move beyond the bounds of academia by incorporating more and other and different voices that were traditionally not brought along in academic work. So that is for me a very clear trend that I recognize in my work as research director.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that, but I think it's that is important, right? That when we speak about decolonization, that is a very constructive move, right? It is an opening up of the boundaries of the different disciplines and an opening up of the ways in which we might produce knowledge. And I think so it is also, in that sense, it's very much geared towards a productive, towards something rather than just away from something. Yes, it's going away from a perspective that I think we should be very glad to leave behind us, but it is also going towards something. So I think that's really the crux there.
Yeah, and actually one of our presenters tomorrow will present on this idea of transdisciplinary or even adisciplinary, how we can, use his conception of metamodernism. It's different, but it has the goal of sort of creating cracks in the system such that we can move more fluidly between them, is my understanding. So we'll hear about that tomorrow. Let's see, we have a question from a member who's come down to the basement.
Can I pose it to you and then you can tell because they probably won't.
Okay, yes.
Well, my question is, how do you all feel as academic theorizers and researchers that have clearly defined this concept, when you see people out in general society online using the term without any real regard for the framework in which you have sort of established it? Like, I know that earlier it was addressed that I feel it's healthy for the theory to have muddy waters, but how would you?
What does it do?
What does it do, and how do you feel maybe true academic researchers thinking in this area can address that?
Was the question heard sufficiently?
Yeah, I heard it. Yeah.
So that means I think probably everyone heard the question.
Yeah. Okay. Look, we have been very pragmatic about this from the start, and also just acknowledge that, yes, when you write something and you publish it, then it's no longer your own. We just try to contribute our fair share, our 2 cents to the discussion. We try to keep it as academic as possible. And if other people contribute their fair share, their 2 cents to the discussion, then that's fine. That's great. Wonderful. It expands the dialogue. And sometimes when it's not a dialogue, that's also fine. I mean, everything is circulated online, so we always find each other. So everybody should write and think with concepts as they please. That's how I'm very pragmatic about this.
Yeah, I think I would echo that. I mean, are there some uses of metamodernism that seem to rely on the way in which I guess many of us define it academically, that I would take issue with or find I'm uncertain about? Yes, but I also think, you know, it's, yeah, whomever, I mean, it's out there, right? And I think also the term is, in a way, I mean, yes, you know, I think it's important we use this term because of its links to metaxis and some of the reasons we outline in the article, but it also, we weren't the first one to come up with this term. And the term is, in a way, it is just a placeholder. It is a way to describe an enormous sort of complex field and array of developments, right? I think this term works really well to capture those, but I think it's, for me, it's more about trying to get a sense of what those developments entail, more than to sort of police the use of that term.
No.
Thank you. So just quickly in the chat, we have Timothy asking whether there are visual strategies in the visual arts effective at achieving metamodern aesthetics. I do think we're going to be hearing from some of our presenters on this topic today, and there's quite a lot of writing about it. Maybe there's an essay from the volume in question here that you could point the question or two.
Yeah, in terms of visual cultures, there are many strategies and practices that you can identify as utterly contemporary and related to the metamodern structure of feeling. Absolutely. Yeah, so there are many.
There's a lot to say.
Yeah, I mean, Alison describes a couple of literary developments, and I would really say read Anthony Broden's book on British poetry and metamodernism, because I think it does a really good job of actually in-depth analyzing a lot of these things. But also, of course, your website, Linda, is involved in precisely in doing this. So I think there's a number of things we can point to, but the book might also be a good starting point. Kai Schwind and Guy Rustad write a lot about the transition from a particular kind of cynical comedy to a comedy that is more warm-hearted, and they work a lot with the kinds of jokes that are and are not okay anymore. James McDowell writes very effectively, I think, about the use in quirky cinema of flat aesthetics and sort of symmetrical aesthetics, and the way in which the films Wes Anderson play with that, particular kinds of reaction shots. So there are very distinct aesthetic strategies that I think we could easily define as metamodern, or at least play a big role in this. But it's important to remember with Jameson and with Williams before that the structure of feeling allows for a variety of aesthetic forms to take hold, and so it is not limited to a particular kind of aesthetic construction or any of those things. There are different types of forms that it can take, right? I would call sometimes wildly different films both metamodern, even though they are aesthetically completely incompatible.
Yeah, we could certainly have an entire conference on this question. Perhaps there will be one in the future. It's a great topic. So I'm noticing that we're into our lunch hour now. We'd really like to warmly thank you both for being here. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Our pleasure. Thanks for the invite.
Yes.
And it's actually wonderfully making use of all the resources that we nowadays have to have part online, part here. Makes the best of two worlds.
Yes. as long as we
Yeah,
figure
I
out.
saw, by the way, I saw one other question by someone called Aled Lambert about whether Peter Sloterdijk is meta-modern.
Oh, okay.
I
Would you
don't think
regard
so.
Peter Sloterdijk as metamodernist?
Yeah, I don't think Peter Sloterdijk is for me at least, but Robert might disagree. I don't think he is a meta-modern philosopher, but I do think that some of the concepts he uses and introduces, for example, the sweet and sour sauce, would for me prove really, really useful in trying to think through some of the debates in metamodernism. But if he himself is a meta-modern philosopher, I wouldn't say so. But I do think some of the concepts he introduces will be super useful for us. Sorry, I didn't want to, Linda. I just thought it's not. I saw the other question. I just wanted to make sure.
Thanks. No, thank you. I appreciate that. And so just as a last comment, we are, as mentioned earlier, having a lunchtime discussion for the online participants, whether it be your lunch, your dinner, or your midnight snack. You are welcome to stay online, and we have a host, David Ghostly, I believe, is online, or he will be shortly, to be your conversation host. And those who are in person can also join the chat at any point during lunch. If you'd like to jump on, you're, again, really welcome to do that and say hello to our online folks. And there's David now. So thank you once again. Rest well, Tim, and we'll enjoy having you here, Robin, for the rest of our time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for arranging this again, Linda, Greg, Anthony, Dennis, Usha, all of you. Thanks so much, really, for doing this. And thanks everyone who was here. I'm going to sleep. See you all later.
Bye-bye.
Sounds like a good idea.